sure I don't forget. Okay.
You can always like click the recording and then click the square stop button, and it can break the recording into chunks.
Oh yeah, totally. Okay, maybe I'll do that. The Halo's choice. Okay, so I think I guess for whoever just popped in, we're just waiting a couple more minutes for like more folks to filter in, and then we can, get the ball rolling here. Oh, maybe something Andrea was wondering is like, what is the like optimum length for a text for the sake of the workshopping?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer.
All right.
I mean, you can't do like a book, maybe like, I don't know. I mean, some people use performance texts that are like half a page, and some people use like 4 to 10 pages. It really depends on what you're doing. But 1 to 10 pages, maybe.
Okay, great.
Not strict.
I brought a one pager, so hopefully that,
Cool.
I was worried I might have had too much. So
we're gonna look at a couple examples that are like 1 page. So
okay, perfect. All right, so it's 2:05, so I figure we can get started, and whoever else comes in a bit, hopefully they can just dive in. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this Artist Talk and Performance Workshop. I'm really excited to dive in with you all. And I've kind of structured it as we're first going to do like a brief exercise, and then I'm going to give a little bit of like an intro about me and my work and kind of how I arrived at performance. And I'm also going to touch on like what I do, what I've done for money, because I feel like that's not always talked about enough when we're thinking about living lives of like artistic queer freak lives. But I'll talk about that just like a little bit. And then we're going to look at some examples of performance works, and that'll be kind of mixed in with a few different exercises I have that will help you develop your own performance based on the source text that you brought. And if you didn't bring one, that's totally okay. So our first exercise, before I like talk about myself for a few minutes, just to kind of bring everyone onto the same plane, is we're going to do an artistic lineage exercise, which I just want you to think about who or what are the things that inspire you and have kind of carried you through to like where you are as artists right now. It could be music, it could be performance, it could be literature, it could be like, your mom did something cool, like whatever it is that has kind of all worked together in different interlocking ways to inspire you in your current practice. Just kind of trace like a lineage, and it can, it can be from like 0 to present, or, think about like kind of your lifespan. So we're going to take 5. Do you have any, first, does anyone have any questions about our exercise? Great.
No. Sorry.
Great. So artistic lineage, we're going to take 5. And I'm starting a timer now. All right, so that was about 5 minutes. Did anyone want to share about their artistic lineage timeline? Maybe like 2 or 3 people? You also don't have to, but you're encouraged to share. There's going to be many opportunities to share today.
I could offer quickly.
Amazing.
My timeline wasn't. I was sort of like focusing on the present moment, and it was funny. Like I was just writing names of people who influenced me, and then I sort of broke it down into like similar preoccupations, similar forms, and then people in my milieu. So like people I work with, it was fun to like write. I'm into theater, so like for form, like playwrights like Young Jean Lee or Susan Laurie Parks. Definitely inspire. And then for preoccupation and themes, thinking about like poets like and prose writers like Dion Brand and Kai Kello, who we actually had here at the fire earlier as a speaker. And then it was fun to like write all these names who are like known, and then write in my milieu of like people who I just work with, like friends from school, and we were all like just trying to write and do our own stuff. So yeah, it was just writing a lot of names, but those being some of them. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I mean, part of why I asked you to do this exercise was to kind of open up where you see influences coming from. Like if you're a poet, not all your influences have to be other poets. And it's also, like you said, a mix of community and friends, along with, big names. Does anyone else want to share?
I'll share. Right, so I started, I guess, kind of differently. Nobody is on my list as an artist necessarily. So it started with my grandparents, who were painters when I was growing up, but I later found out that they were just enrolled in a painting class, but they just had their really traditional painting kind of all over their apartment when I was growing up. And they also worked at some artisan fairs. So that was really inspiring me from a young age. And then like children's books and like the illustrations within that. And from a young age, I knew that I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't necessarily know what that meant. So I felt like it was constrained to painting and drawing and like sculpture. And of course, I dabbled a bit of that in high school and in like an art concentration program and in CEGEP. And it was really in university, I think, that I moved away from my from both of those practices because of soccer, because of the Creative Reuse Center, and focusing more on sustainable art practice and kind of performance as the ultimate way to transcend materiality.
Amazing. I love that. And it's also, I also find it useful to think about this type of exercise, like looking forward, like what types of conversations do you want your work to be a part of and like break open further. And I see in the chat that Jordy shared influences that are science fiction and Marxism, which are excellent influences in my opinion. Did anyone else want to share before I talk about myself for like a few minutes? Final chance.
Yeah, I have like a quick list without context. If anybody is that okay? Do we have time?
Yes, of course.
So similarly, like a lot of them are just friends of mine, in addition to like writers and artists. I wrote them chronologically in the order that I encountered them. So doctors, 2005 to present. Music dudes who are around, 2011, 2012. My friend Mark Streeter, who does work in like DIY community arts activism. My friend Sherry Huang, Lou Sullivan, Hazel Meyer, Walter Scott, Octavia Butler, T. I don't actually know how to say his name, but T. Fleischman and Ann Boyer.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. I have this pin. I don't know if you can see it, but it was like one of my friend Alice Martin, who was one of the co-editors of the Lou Sullivan Diaries. We both laughed in pleasure, made these pins when the book came out. So I'm glad you are familiar with Lou.
Yeah, I love Lou.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen, but I'm not going to share my screen the whole time, I promise. Can you see? Loading. Can everyone see? Okay, great. So this is just kind of like, you know, title page overview of my publications and some of my work history, because I do think it's important to talk about work stuff sometimes. And we did this exercise already. And I wrote like a brief artist statement that I titled Artist Statement in Heightened Times of Repression. So I'm gonna read that to you and kind of click through some images that are relevant, and then we're gonna do more exercises. All right, so my body and my identities occupy so many liminal spaces as a queer person, as a trans person, and as an Arab American person living in a post 9/11 America, that both I and my artistic practice contain multitudes of poetry, performance, autofiction, curation, printing, and publishing. When I first committed myself to a life of writing and community engagement, I began by writing about the effects of post-Occupy heightened state repression in 2012, the year I moved from Boston, Massachusetts to Oakland, California, where I lived for 6 years. They were single-page poems, ultimately collected in chapbook form, titled, "It is a tight little world that we live in, and I'm trapped here." And it was produced by the small chapbook collective Mess Editions, that was the collective I was a part of, along with Laura Durbach and Wendy Trevino, who are both amazing poets, and they both still live in the Bay. And the Chapbook Press's Mess Editions' curatorial mission was to publish emerging writers from queers, people of color, and those involved in social movements, yet not necessarily involved in art or capital P poetry scenes. And endlessly intertwined with friendship and queer community, my friend Drea, Marina, and I co-hosted Words of Resistance, which is those flyers you see here, which was an open floor poetry night for radical queers to fundraise commissary money for political prisoners that happened monthly for 5 years, from 2012 to 2017. And the kind of moment in which Drea and I started this series was, it was in 2012, and it was 2 years post Oscar Grant's death, by murder by police, and mere months after Occupy Oakland had been disbanded or evicted, and in the midst of grand jury repression in the Pacific Northwest. And I always think of collective upheaval as a bubbling up of the surface until a flashpoint occurs. And the surface becomes liquid, and we push through into rupture. Before the liquidation of the surface, the upraising may not have felt possible before, and the surface, now molten, has an allowing elasticity for riot. And once the surface hardens again, we have to be careful, watch out for each other. It's scary to feel alone, isolated, during times of heightened repression. And that was kind of the conditions in which, you know, Drea and I started Words of Resistance, and the Mess Editions chapbook came together. And so these are some more flyers. And, you know, we would bike around and post flyers, and it was a good time. And after I lived in the Bay for a couple of years, I applied to MFA programs and got into Mills College, which is currently experiencing a lot of turmoil and might cease being a degree granting institution. And while I was at Mills, I intended to write about the perils and violences of global capitalism and its physical effects on large cities. But there was a lack of emotional capture happening. So I trashed the draft along with the rules of the canon, and continued to write a slew of kill bro vengeance poems pointed against the henchmen of patriarchy and white supremacy. And the project became my first book, Extra Transmission, which is a poetic critique of the US military's role in the war on terror. And as I continued to do readings, I experimented with performative gestures and sought inspiration in queer nightlife to verse my poetry practice into performance. And some more shots from mess editions. Like, this is, I was a pedicabber for 6 years or first 5 years while I lived in the Bay. And that is like where I got money basically through MFA school and through, being a punk. This is an imposing photo of Mills College. And this is a craft lesson about how to be a poet, which is basically like a lesson on how to be like a good literary citizen. And so there's a pie and you're supposed to do 2 out of the 3 things of the pie to kind of enter into poetry community. And the pie slices say, write good work, read, publish. Another pie slice says, create community. So like start a journal, start a reading series, stuff like that. And the other pie slice says interact with existing community, which is like writing reviews, inviting people to read at your events, stuff like that. So kind of another way to like dispel the myth of the writer or the artist being like lonely and living in a vacuum away from community, because it's just not a thing. Okay, so early performance. So these are some photos from, I was working on Extra Transmission and I was kind of starting to experiment with gesture and performance a little bit. And I collaborated with a dancer who was also at Mills, and I collaborated with them on their thesis project, in which they wanted me to perform one of my poems on stage while they did their dance piece. And the dance department was like, you have to memorize it. And so I had to memorize this really long poem, which is not normally how I performed my poetry. And so I memorized it. And then I was kind of coming up against like, what the fuck do I do with my body if I don't have a thing to hold on stage? And that was also before I got top surgery. So I was much less embodied than I am now. And so those kind of like early struggle moments, like reckoning with what to do with the body on stage. And this photo on the left here is, I was also starting to experiment with like projection. So kind of like in queer nightlife spaces, still like reading, still very poetry, but projecting stuff over me, like certain lines. Anyways, so this is a chapter from my book, Extra Transmission, but before it was a book, it was a zine called Kill Bro, Kill Cop. Also, some fun punk ephemera. Okay. So in 2018, I was invited to perform on the Sister Spit Tour, which is an offshoot of Radar Productions, which is a literary queer nonprofit based in San Francisco. And I knew that I had to push my practice even further. I didn't want to just go on this tour and read like I'd been doing. And I'd done some performative things, like I mentioned, with projection. And I love to throw like pages on the floor and, be really loud when I read. And I wanted to do something more than just those collection of gestures that I developed at this time. And so I adapted a part of a work in progress that is now going to be published as my second book, Villainy. And I adapted a section from it that I called the performance absorption. And for the performance, I printed out the poems on actually sticky labels and stuck them onto pieces of silver mylar so I could read from them. And as I finished reading each page, I would staple each page of the text onto my own body in front of like a glitching type of projection. And so the projection would be reflected back at the audience because it was silver. And so as the text was adhered to sheets of reflective mylar or screens, they reflected the projection back at the audience. And this piece was really wrote in against like the rise of new fascism in the US. So this was in, I think I wrote the first draft in like 2016, 2017. And I started performing it as a performance piece in early 2018. And I did this every night for 2 weeks on tour. We did the Southwest and the West Coast. And although this particular element wasn't necessarily visible to new audiences, the accumulation of incisions and bruises from the impact of the stapler approached the limits of what I could withstand. And I'm just going to show you. This is a medical stapler. And at first I thought I wanted to use like a wall staple gun, and then I quickly realized I did not want to use that. So you can get these from like vet stores from the internet. And you also, very important, need a remover, or else it's very, very hard to get them out. And one time I performed this piece and I forgot the remover and I had to pull the staples out with pliers, and that I would not recommend that. But they're pretty shallow because the point of a medical stapler is to push two edges of skin together, not like go really deep. So, so I'm starting to develop like a practice of visceral accumulation. And what's the next slide? Oh yeah, these are just some more kind of shots from those performances. But yeah, I had made these Kilbro patches, and I would read some of the Kilbro poems and like staple the patch to myself, and then I would go on and do the performance of absorption after that. So these are some fun performance stills. What's next? Oh yeah, I moved to New York. And I just kind of want to finish off this statement by saying like, why poetry? Like, why do I use poetry and writing as kind of the basis for performance? And I center writing as a rigorous edge-breaking craft to unravel our global capitalist world. And through poetic, experiential, and documentary immersion, I demand the queering of the terrorist archetype. I write a lot about the war on terror. And so like the terrorist is kind of a big figure, and how it's defined as a big figure. By reclaiming its power for acts of queer disruption. What are acts of queer terror that occur in daily life? How to disrupt the hetero matrix through queer acts of defiance to the straight status quo. For example, public flogging on the subway, sex toys through TSA, mesh that reveals surgery scars. Some strategies that I seek in language and gesture are formlessness and formal precision, wild and unrestrained poetics, obsession and desire, abolitionist perspectives, fantastical futurities, a poetry of directness, a poetry with teeth. I think I'll leave the statement off there. Just a little more about me. I moved to New York in 2018. My second book like has a complicated history, but it got selected in 2018 and it's now coming out this year from Nightboat Books. And I want to talk a little bit about these performances. So when I was getting ready for Extra Transmission to come out, I was really excited about it to come out. I'd written it mostly in like 2015, 2016. It came out in 2019. So as you know, there's a lag in publishing time, and sometimes, so I'd read from it a lot and I kind of wanted to do more for its debut. And so I worked with this performance artist and art director, Lexi, and we developed this like collaborative performance together involving more stapling. And kind of, there's this whole section in Extra Transmission about, the self being undone by memory loss and using technology and fusion to become a new self. And so we used this mesh cable and stapling kind of like battle over it. And eventually they like staple the mesh cable to me. So yeah, there's some, and we performed it together at the Poetry Project in February of 2019. And these are just some shots from it. And this is a cute photo. But I just want to say, so I did this reading at the Poetry Project in February 2019, and I read with Kay Gabriel, and we were new friends at the time, but we've since gone on to co-edit the anthology of radical trans poetics called We Want It All. So I wanted to mention her because she's amazing, and just more cute stuff about extra transmission. And I also want to touch on, I've done a lot of like curatorial and editorial work. I curated this segue reading series with a friend of mine named Becca Tyke, which is a weekly reading series that goes for 2 months. And this is like our call for submissions for the anthology back in the day. And now I work at the Poetry Project. So thank you for listening to my artist talk. I hope you found it interesting. And I just want to say, like, think about the duration. I kind of started taking myself seriously as a poet and a writer in 2012. So I've been doing this for kind of a long time, which is really exciting. And my practice has been adapting. So before we move on to looking at more performance inspo, I don't know if you all have heard about this exciting group, but in 2016, the Yerba Mala Collective, they're based out of Philly. They wrote this Antifa spell book that's kind of like a collection of spells and incantations of resistance. And I really like to use it as kind of like a popcorn style, like free write. And I'm gonna ask that we do this free write, and it'll kind of bring us into a, oh no, ignore this, into a generative space. So what we're gonna do is, so this is like the first page. We're gonna do rapid fire free writes, and we're gonna do 3 of them. So I'm gonna just scroll, and then I'm gonna stop scrolling, and then we're gonna land on a spell, and then you'll have 2 minutes to respond to the spell. So here we go. I'm gonna scroll. Oh no. Well, okay. First spell, 2 minutes. Okay, we're gonna go to the next spell, which we're going this way. Okay. 2 minutes. Okay, last one, 2 minutes. Okay, that was 2 minutes. I'm gonna stop screen sharing for a while. And now we're gonna do a proper welcome. So I was hoping we could go around, everyone could share name, pronoun, sun sign, and a little bit about the source text that you brought in. And if you didn't bring a source text, a little bit about your response to the free write, or both. So we can guess I'll call on people. Jules?
Hey, I'm Jules, pronouns they, them. I'm one of the FAR collective members. A little bit about the source text. So I wasn't fully sure what the source text was because things have been going in and out through my ear. I do have a poem that I wrote. Was it something that we've written or something that we were drawing from, or?
Ideally something that you've written.
Okay, great. Who would have thought I'd have written a poem last week? Finally, after 3 weeks of not verbally functioning. Yeah, what's this poem about? I guess augury is a big theme in my poetry, I've noticed. So this kind of like this experience of kind of experiencing something very visceral that one associates with kind of like the intestines and the guts, and also motion is another big theme in my poetry. I've kind of for a very long time had this sense that, you know, no being is kind of settled or unitary, and you know there's the long-term critique, critique of the kind of the Enlightenment individual that is separate. So I think that I kind of return again and again to this sense of kind of like being as being beings in motion. So that kind of returns a lot in imagery. And recently I've been very concerned with the sense that language is this kind of permanent failure to do anything, and mostly to kind of like language is ultimately a kind of failure to like bridge the gap over which the kind of the real asserts itself, and all of everything kind of comes to fruition and comes to being, and comes to try to actualize itself in that kind of gap over the kind of fundamental gap that is being. And so that's been returning in my poetry a lot too. So I guess unfortunately that kind of stuck itself in the poem a little bit, but I couldn't really tell you what the poem's about. Most of that, sorry. Yeah.
Amazing. Did you want to share your sign? You like don't have
I'm
to.
a Virgo.
Great.
Can you tell?
I don't know. I love Virgos. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna just go in the lines that are this little grid. So Chloe.
Hi, I'm Chloe, she, they. I guess I didn't necessarily prepare a text or have a text in mind for this. But I do have like a list of notes of words that I kind of want to process, and kind of vaguely about navigating relationships with physical, digital, and exterior spaces, transcending the material world, feeling vibrations, and documentation. Oh, and I'm a Cancer. So.
Amazing. Yeah, the source text, I didn't really define it when but it can be like anything ideally original. It can be a list, like maybe you have, it can be a poem. I think people operate in different ways when they use text, so it's kind of open. And we'll see some examples that are variant. Quinn?
Hi, my name's Quinn. My pronouns are he, him. I'm another collective member at the FAR, working with Jules and Prue and La. I'm an Aquarius sun, and my poem today, you said list, and I was like, wait, I was going through an old notebook, and I have a list that I wrote that's semi-poetic from last year's early COVID angst, but also personal life stuff. And I'm double checking that it's kosher for a public workshop, and I think it is. So I think that's what I'll be going with. I had another larger, like 2-page thing that I was workshopping for a playwriting class, but I think this is more fun. So I'm happy that I found something in the last 30 seconds that will be hopefully conducive to this. So that's me.
Great. Effie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Effie. Any pronouns are fine. All of them work. None of them really fit. I am a Libra. The source text I brought in today is a chapbook I'm working on, so maybe I'll select something from there that deals with selves and selves as a way to sort of think about identity, and I do that through the choreographer Deborah Hay. She talks a lot about the multiplicity and potential of the cellular within the body. So sort of dealing with that. Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you. Cleo?
Hi, I'm Cleo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Aries sun. I was not particularly prepared, but I'm hoping I have a couple poems that I might pick. I might pick one, hopefully in the course of the next couple of minutes, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, just for my own experience, I often I'll write poems and then 2 years later they'll become a performance. It's not an immediate transference, and maybe it is for some people. So it makes a lot of sense that people are bringing in work that they wrote last year, maybe older, maybe newer. Ev?
Hi. So yeah, I'm Ev. I use they, them pronouns. Sagittarius. The two poems, I brought two, and I was just kind of gonna feel it out to see which one felt more appropriate for this space. They're both from the same sequence that I don't have a title for yet, but is essentially has just been over the last few months, I've been thinking about how queerness and the phenomenologies of desire have been, obviously these super urgent and important concerns. And I encountered Eve Tuck's ideas around trauma-based research and pleasure-based research last year, and I've been thinking about that. So anyway, coming out of that, I'm thinking about horniness as a critical optic. And so both of these poems are about horniness. One is, I used as a source text a medical thesaurus that I found in the trash. And it consists of a bunch of words that I made up about horniness using that source text. And the other one is a little more depending on what you think is fun. It explores it's more speculative and explores the idea of horniness as a place. And yeah, I don't know. I owe an apology to Jordan Peele for that one, because I use the idea of the sunken place as the horny place. And I feel like that's not super fair to his work, but that's that.
Amazing. Can't wait. Molly?
Hi. This is really interesting. This is what's going on here. I'm really proud to and happy to kind of, just share with you guys. And I've been writing for a long time. And it's always was a pleasure of a certain way to connect with my grounding myself. And now I'm really on the task of thinking my personal options as an individual trying to seek love, attention, and respect recognition and self-confidence by not non-judgmental type of experiences. So poems are really relating to these aspects of my curiosity and interrogation. Somebody that I really kind of followed this last winter, Kim Talbert, a really important person that I really learned a lot from. She's doing with a lot of conferences and lecture about that topic of affair of Indigenous studies and sexualities, identities. So yeah, that's it. Nice to meet you all.
Amazing. Okay. Leyland will be right back. Okay. Prue.
Hi, yeah. So I guess for those who don't know me yet, my name's Prudence or Prue. I use she, they, and I'm a Pisces, but don't spread it around. And I've been working on like I guess a manuscript for the last probably like seriously for the last like 4 or 5 months. This all kind of written from the perspective of like a young bride. It's a bit like a coming of age story kind of. It's like very surreal, and like I think the most good parts of it are like holding like fear of sex and like early sexualizing with like extreme desire and imaginative desire for sex kind of as those intersect. So yeah, I mean, I bought a like a used veil off the internet, but that's about as far as I've gotten in terms of thinking about performance. So I'm excited to kind of flesh it out here.
Amazing. We're going to talk about the search for materials, which is a really fun aspect of putting together performances. And I want to make sure Leyland can share when they return. So the next kind of like section of the workshop, we're going to look at some performance inspo, and we're also going to do some exercises. And so as we like move through the next few sections, I want us to think about our source text, and the next few exercises being like creating the scaffolding in which the source text can live and inhabit and expand. So we're going to talk about interruptions. We're going to talk about the body. We're going to talk about materials. We're going to talk about mapping, and then we're going to assemble our performances. Yay. And of course, if anyone has any like questions or anything, feel free to speak up or drop them in the chat. Did Ev share? No. There's a couple people who I think are hopping in and out. So Ev, do you want to share?
Is this of me? I did share.
Oh, I'm sorry. You turned your camera off, and so
yeah,
it's like
sorry.
it's a different person. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm gonna share my screen again. Share. Okay. Performance inspo. And kind of returning to the first exercise we did around lineage, inspiration, very important. I find that it's really hard for me to create anything if I'm not like actively ingesting material. So if I'm not reading, I'm like not creating. And I imagine it might be similar for other people. So we're going to talk about 2 performance artists and look at some examples of their work. And I don't know if any of you all are familiar with Cecilia Vicuña, but she has this quote that is on the screen. A poem only becomes poetry when its structure is made not of words, but of forces. And Cecilia Vicuña is a poet, a performance artist, a filmmaker, a sculpture artist. She's done all kinds of things. And I interpret this quote as, you know, I think someone mentioned the failure of language, and I interpret this quote to be kind of a drive to push language into the physical material realm, to in some way adapt it and implicate like the physical world, your body, and also other people. And one of my favorite things about Cecilia Vicuña is that she's really into participatory performance and inviting in both other people and other unplanned elements into her performances. And one of the ways in which she has done that is, you know, she creates these sculptures of living kupu, which is indigenous to Chile kind of textile making practice. And she, you know, walks around a room and hands people, like doesn't say anything, isn't like I'm Cecilia Vicuña, I'm going to do this performance. She like walks into a room, maybe from the back of the room, and hands out pieces of the textile to people. And one of the things she does, she creates this kind of like net and network. And so it's not like the audience isn't instructed, but they're kind of like immediately invited in from the moment the performance begins. And that is something that I thinking about, like the construct of performance and like performing in front of an audience, and how do you break the fourth wall? How do you create as non-hierarchical a space as possible? And I think it's something that she does extremely well. And another thing that she is very well known for is inviting in like interruptions and spontaneity and other disruptive elements into her performances that are totally unplanned. So for example, like say you're performing somewhere and there's a really noisy elevator. She gave this performance in a space with a really noisy elevator that when people were arriving to become part of the audience, they would take a really noisy elevator. And so it was like, you know, the elevator's cadence was like theoretically could have interrupted her performance, but instead she kind of adapted what she was doing and let the elevator be part of it. And so gave the elevator like space. So, you know, she would speak or sing, and then she would let the elevator like be noisy, and then she would continue. And that's something that I admire a lot and I think is really, really challenging. And I did a reading on a rooftop in Dumbo in Brooklyn, and it was like literally like right under the Manhattan Bridge. And so the trains were like going over in both directions, like every couple of minutes, even like more frequently than that. And they're really loud, and where the people I was reading with, like they didn't have a mic. And so I was like, I can attempt to fight the train, or I can just pause for a really long time. And it was really hard. It was like an exercise in patience, but like people could hear me if I waited for the train. And then it created kind of, you know, different line breaks in the work I was reading. And so, you know, the source text like transformed into something completely different as lineated by the train. And that wasn't something that like you could plan necessarily. And I just want to think about like entering a performance space, because you don't know, I mean, when we can go back to physical spaces, like there could be a noisy elevator, the walls could be really thin, someone could be drilling next door, like there's all these things that you can't anticipate that you have to kind of have an openness and receptiveness to working with, and it'll make your performance better. And this is just her bio. Shout out to her. And for a second. And so, yeah, the two like lessons that she gives us are thinking about performance as a participatory space. So inviting other people, both other people and other elements in, and kind of embracing the spontaneous aspect of performance. And so I know it might be kind of a challenging thought exercise because our physical spaces are so limited these days, but I want us to think about, when we're developing our materials list, I want us to think about interruption as a material, and it's something to, consider in advance. And so in our next, these are just some of her books. And Spit Temple is especially amazing because it has translated transcriptions of her performances, and also like her original poems that she used as like the source text for some of the performances. So you can see the kind of like wild variations between the two. So, which brings us to our next exercise, interruption as material. And so I want you to think about, kind of imagine your source text coming to life. What kind of space do you want it to be in, etc. But before we do that, since we are stuck in our current spaces, with your source text in mind and kind of like the ideal version of how and where your source text would be presented, I want us to close our eyes for 2 minutes and just breathe and be attuned to what's happening in your space, and just kind of receive the things that are happening in your space. So, 2 minutes. Okay, now open your eyes and record what you noticed in the space. Now for just 1 minute, pick one of the things that you observed and invite it into your ideal version of the performance. Okay, great. Can maybe we have 2 volunteers to share their experience receiving interruption and then welcoming it.
I can volunteer. I had a pretty strong reaction. I mean, I had my eyes closed, but the color yellow was still kind of inescapable. And beyond all, like a lot of the things I was taking note of were like things I could hear or like kind of feel, like temperature, breezes, etc. But the color yellow is the thing that like most impressed itself on me as something to like work alongside or like enter in for the sake of performance. Which I thought it's not what I would have chosen, but it is the most maybe creatively like stimulating of the things I wrote down.
That's great. I mean, it's important if you know where you're going to be presenting, like the colors and the visuals of the space are important too. And it's also good to think about like, how do you want to transform the space to suit your performance while also like, adapting your performance a little bit to meet the space. For example, like say the chairs are in one direction and you want them to be in another direction. It's like the rules of the space can be like, you can disrupt the rules of the space as much as the space can disrupt you. It's a love-hate relationship. Did anyone else want to share about their receiving? No one? That's okay. We will continue with more inspo.
Can we
Oh,
share?
go ahead.
Yeah?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking about, wait, I wrote it down. This is really a big question, interruption as material. I came up with bending the edge or edgy corners of the space, as in people or noise, can be found in also height of like grandeur, of objects. And it's not by fighting against, what you perceive as not welcoming, but kind of accepting it for you, to bend them. And bending means in that case is really, it could be also approached as kind of an energetic type of work, but mental work, but also just a certain type of combination of gestures, when you're kind of entering in a space and while performing, it can be also perceived as like angular, but you can also transform it as something more circular, any shape that you find more communicative, and just what you want, what you need, what is necessary for you to kind of observe and experiment on. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thinking about the space, transforming the space. And we have a note in the chat from Ev. I was mostly reflecting on my body itself, unruly, uncomfortable, aching, tired, in pain as the interrupting force. This is an excellent segue to our next section, because we're going to talk about the body. Every queer's favorite topic. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I just want people to continue thinking about interruptions and spontaneity as being a part of the scaffolding of your performance, even when you can't, plan it in advance. Okay, we did this. I'm going to do like a performance 101 thing and quote Marina Abramovich. So she writes, I had experienced absolute freedom. I had felt that my body was without boundaries, limitless, that pain didn't matter and nothing mattered at all, and it intoxicated me. For those of you who are familiar or not familiar with Marina Abramovich's bio, she's a performance artist from Belgrade, and she's not like a poet and a writer. She doesn't use writing as her source text. She kind of uses like her personal experience intermingled with lots of politics at the time, and like romantic relationships. So like, post, World War I, World War II type post politics. And she heavily foregrounds the body and does lots of honestly really brutal performances like to herself. And we're going to talk about a couple of them, but I do just want to think about like why it seems like an obvious question to many, but why foreground the body? And I think about this with respect to both like writing and poetry and also performance. And when I think about it in the context of poetry, I think about the I, and I think about the I needing to have stakes and be implicated whenever I'm talking about. And like, how do you do that? You have to have some type of relationship to the work. I do a lot of like documentary poetics research, but like I am always a subject in like the frame of that research. So I've done a lot of research on the war on terror. I'm Arab American, and I've experienced a lot of intergenerational trauma. And though I haven't served in the military, and I don't know anyone who served in the military, like in my family history, like I feel part of, I feel affected by the war on terror very deeply. And so I'm just kind of like, where do you place yourself within the work when you're trying to write about like big evil things? And with respect to performance, putting the body on stage, similarly implicates the self in whatever construct you're talking about. And it implicates the self. I mean, I think in my own practice, it implicates the self further if the body is affected in some way, if it's affected viscerally. Because if it's affected viscerally, then the stakes for yourself are raised, and you're committing in front of other people, and you're making like the scars and the incisions public. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that. But this image is from a Marina Abramovich performance called Thomas Lips, in which she, used a knife to create this star on her stomach. And These are the actual, these are her performance instructions that she wrote before she did the performance. So does anyone want to read it?
I can read it.
Great, thank you.
Starting from the title or from performance?
From the title.
Okay. Lips of Thomas, performance. I slowly eat 1 kilo of honey with a silver spoon. I slowly drink 1 liter of red wine out of a crystal glass. I break the glass with my right hand. I cut a 5-pointed star on my stomach with a razor blade. I violently whip myself until I can no longer feel pain. I violently whip myself until I no longer feel any pain. I lay down on a cross made of ice blocks. The heat of a suspended space heater pointed at my stomach causes the cut star to bleed. The rest of my body begins to freeze. I remain on the ice cross for 30 minutes until the audience interrupts the piece by removing the ice blocks from underneath.
Thank you. And this goes on, as you can see, for 2 hours. So if you can I just want you all to think about this for a moment. Like, this is very viscerally extreme. And I'm also thinking about the time period, like it's 1975 in Austria, and like, who was the person that, like, I want to know who was the person who hung up the space heater. And I've seen photos, and it's like this huge space heater, like it's like larger, it's like wider than her, and it's like hanging over her. And just thinking about like a really, really hot space heater, like somehow like temporarily like suspended above her. And in addition, the extremes of temperature. And
May I interrupt with a question?
of
I don't know
course,
if you'll have the answer to it, but I'm wondering if Marina instructed people to remove the ice blocks or if that was up to the audience.
I believe it was up to the audience.
Yeah.
Like, at some point the audience is like, this cannot go on. And she does a lot of in a different way from Cecilia Vicuña, she does a lot of giving agency to the audience.
Mhm.
I feel like Cecilia Vicuña kind of invites the audience to be on the same kind of plane as her, and a lot of Marina's performances, she gives the audience a lot of power. And think this is like, you can plan this performance to an extent, but then it's like when it ends is up to the audience. And that is like, think about the stakes for herself and her safety in this situation. So I kind of want to continue before we do this exercise. So Rhythm Zero is another one of Marina's early performances. And
I got a little question, sorry.
Yeah, please.
What you just mentioned, I'm thinking, do you perceive it? And the question is for everyone else to want to respond. Is it an act of, how do you perceive it, more as an act of generosity or of benevolence, or it's more of a statement, willing to kind of be there available to the public while performing and saying you got also a certain voice and you can interfere, right? Interact. Is it more of a statement or more of a gesture, a personal gesture from the artist?
I mean, I can speak for like myself. I see it as like opening up the waves of like conversation between like stage and audience, and kind of flattening the hierarchy between performer and audience. And like, I think about like a punk show, like where the punk band is performing and there is no stage. It's just like the floor is all like literally on the same level as the audience. And then the distance between the audience and the band is like invisible, right? People dance and mosh and it's really chaotic. And so I think about that as like a visual example of kind of erasing like the boundaries between performer and audience. And I think the audience can be, another thing is that I like to do and that I believe Cecilia Vicuña to do is, you know, talking about big political issues and then inviting the audience and like forcing them to reckon with like the truth and reality of things, and thus implicating them in like, okay, so now they have the information, like they, you know, trying to push them to do something in a response, like leave the performance and like then be thinking about this issue and then maybe be called to action. That was a great question. Would someone like to read the performance instructions for Rhythm 0?
Yeah, I can read it.
Thanks.
Rhythm 0, instructions. There are 72 objects on the table that one can use on me as desired. Performance, I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility. Duration, 6 hours, 8 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Thank you. So this is a full, it's a little blurry because it's blown up, but this is the full list of materials that Marina placed on a table. And so she, you know, she placed these materials on a table, wrote these instructions. These instructions were framed on a table next to the materials. And then she just stood in the center of the room, and then the audience was invited to do whatever they wanted to her. And they had the materials at their disposal. So, you know, she was standing there still, but like people could move her around. And I wanted to think about this as like, this is like an extreme example of completely shifting the power from performer to audience. And so some of the things that happened during this period of time where, you know, people drew on her, people took off her shirt, one man like put a bullet into the gun and like put it in her hand and pointed it at herself, and she just had to stand there in this position, and she ended up with like a slice on her neck from one of the many sharp things. Yes, so I just wanted us to kind of think about this and take this in. These are a lot of materials. I would recommend honing in on your materials, and I really think like less is more, especially if you're someone who's like moving like from text, like Marina's kind of doing like less text, more performance. Because in my own practice, I don't want to like, I try not to like overshadow the text with, you know, lots of materials. I'm trying to like amplify the text through, you know, gesture and performance. So this is just your bio, but I wanted to go back and send us into breakout rooms for, let's do 7 minutes. And I want us to kind of talk about like in your breakout rooms, like, how do you want to use your body on stage? Thinking about these different power relations between performer and audience. Where do you want that? Like, how do you want to establish or dissipate that power? How do you think about your source text, and how do you want to implicate yourself using your body into the source text and the big topics that you're all thinking about? So I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to send us into breakout rooms. Create 3, 2, maybe 3. And then we'll reconvene. Okay. Move to room 1. Okay. Open all rooms. Is this a room?
I'm not sure.
I think this is a room. Oh, wait. Chloe, you didn't join your room. Oh, Chloe joined the room.
I'm not sure if I can join. Maybe.
Maybe I can send you to a room.
Yeah, let's see about that.
Okay, I'm gonna send you to room 2. No. Is it because you're hosting? Is it because you're recording?
I think it's probably because I'm also hosting. Yeah, that'd be my guess anyway.
Well, we can talk.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've never done the breakout room thing, so I don't know how to make you're not popping up when I open it.
Yeah, no, I have no idea how any of this works, so do not worry. This has been so good so far. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I've never taught on Zoom before, and so.
How's it feeling?
It's weird.
Yeah.
Everyone's so tiny little square.
Yeah.
And it's hard to read the room,
Yeah, well, it's a kind of an interesting like meta conversation about performance during the actual conversation about performance, to just like have that like disconnect between like the audience energy and when you're kind of in front of it. Have you done many like Zoom like online readings or whatever since COVID started?
I have done a lot. Yeah. I don't really like doing it. I mean, I'm like not taking my own advice at inviting the interruption into my life, but it's hard. I only do it. I only say yes if I like really want to do it.
Yeah, of course.
This is most of the time, but it's hard.
Yeah, I really, I guess to kind of pick up if you feel okay talking about the like prompts you gave the rest of them or whatever.
Yes.
So I'm interested this idea of like shifting the power between the performer and the audience, like something that I'm thinking about in context with that, I guess, is that for me, I've always kind of felt like, or like, what am I trying to say? I feel like fundamentally the thing I'm trying to do in a performance is like probably more kindred with like, at least on its surface, with like entertainment than, and I think my thinking with that is that that's kind of a very quick way, it's a very economic way to kind of get an entire like through like kind of charm and engagement to get like an entire kind of worldview, almost like sneak it through to a very receptive audience, but that actually involves quite a bit of power being placed in my position. And so I'm just kind of, and this is like a really interesting question though, like I guess what are your, like, do you have a, like when you're performing, is like what goals do you have in mind? I guess what are you trying to have people like walk away with,
I mean, I want people to think about like how awful the war on terror is, and how challenging but necessary it is to be like visibly queer in public. And I've written a lot about like grief on the heels of the ghost ship fire, because I lived in Oakland when the fire happened and lost a lot of friends, and was grieving for like intensely for like 2 years. And I wrote a lot of work during that time period about that and about the Muslim ban in 2017. And I mean, I want people to like know that these are like lived experiences that are happening, that there are like big bad things like the military industrial complex that very immediately affect people like me, people like you, people, all kinds of people who are trying to immigrate to the US and serving with the fantasy that they're going to get citizenship at the end of it. Stuff like that. Yeah, I love performing, and it's been a real challenge in the age of COVID to not have that be part of my like everyday life. And I also like, it feels very like both cathartic and powerful to, and also like adrenaline rushy to perform so intensely. And also, you know, when I do like stapling, etc., I'm like literally getting adrenaline because I'm experiencing like tiny incisions.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, similar. Like I love performing so much. I mean, kind of right. The last like big show I did was like a friend and I organized this thing in like kind of this like old crumbling church around Halloween time, and like I don't know, it felt like such like an apex of everything I cared about. And then like yeah, a few months later, it was like performance just ceased to be, at least in person. But I guess, what was I gonna say? Yeah, so the interesting thing is that like it's really changed the way I write, because I don't have like I guess when I was kind of doing that a lot, it was like I really had an audience in mind, and like stuff was almost being written for the sake of like how it was gonna land, like what are the beats, like, you know, is this gonna drag, like, and I feel like I'm kind of writing for, you know, the page or whatever for the first time because of this like cessation in performance. And it's not bad, it's just like super different. So now I'm kind of, this is actually such serendipitous timing, this workshop, because it's like, how do I like wrote all this shit, and it's like, how the hell am I going to like do this live, you know? It's not quick, it's not like super rapid fire. It's like really long form, there's like paragraphs and a main character consistent, so it's like, you know, yeah, that's kind of that's my thing. So but yeah,
I will say to you that I would suggest like not worrying so much about the audience, especially now. Like just trust the audience will be there no matter what. Even if they don't like you, they'll be there. There's always an audience.
Yeah, that's a good point.
How do I, okay. I'm gonna bring everyone back because yeah, we're running out of time.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Breakout rooms will close in 60 seconds. Okay. I'm gonna combine two exercises and then we will assemble.
Cute.
And hopefully people don't have to like leave immediately at 4.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see, but I have a feeling people will be fine sticking around for a bit.
Cool.
And yeah, I guess while we have this private moment, like, thank you again so much. This has just been like such a delight.
Thank you for finding me. It was really fun to put together. I hope it's feeling generative for everyone.
Yeah, totally. It looks like it was fun to put together, you know, it's got that energy.
Yeah. Hello, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome back. I think, okay. Everyone's coming back. Welcome. Really quick, does each group want to share a little bit about your conversation about the body?
Yeah, I can say something, and then unfortunately I also have to run to another meeting, but I first wanted to just thank you all for being here and for all of these great sort of provocations you've left us with.
Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the sort of relationships we want to have with other living and breathing bodies in the room, and the sort of importance of that, and a sort of awareness of that when going into performance, whether it's, yeah, performance or theater, but also with writing, thinking about the other living and breathing body on the other end of a poem that's being read or being penned. I don't know if you want to, Molly, if you want to add anything to what we talked about, but.
Yes, it's totally fine. And also I was trying also to kind of share with Effie what's her practice and how does she perceive the body, not only the body image, but how can we find also neutrality and into the performance. And it's really interesting to share one-on-one because we don't know each other. So it's like there's this, this type of honesty, or, this interaction that is just right there. And you can learn a lot into the process of sharing like this. So I thank you.
Yeah, thank you too.
Thank you both for sharing. Does the other group want to say anything about the body?
Are we the other group?
You are the other group.
Okay.
Prue is a host, so Prue
Okay.
couldn't go into a group.
Well, we were kind of talking about, I guess, our own practices and how we engage with poetry and performance. And I'm kind of like, I see it all as a big picture in my mind. A question that I kind of posed as being more of like not a poet, more into performance, I guess. About whether or not they both heard, I guess, themselves speaking the poetry that they're writing, and like in relation to speaking or poetry reading when the work is being made. Does that make sense? If anybody wants to intervene. But I guess as like the first like kind of entry space to what to do with the body is kind of like when speaking poetry more specifically. And then an interesting note is that I pointed out right at the end. I think this is funny. The breakout room notification closure as interruption.
I love that. You're already listening to the teachings of Cecilia Vicuña.
And we counted it down together.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Effie said just before about kind of feeling kind of the living the breathing bodies together in a space. And one of our previous workshops actually was given by someone named Nick Dorado, who's a musician. And what they were talking about was the fact that Zoom imposes this kind of asynchronous temporality, so that even though we are technically in a room together. Like if we were all to count down and try to clap together, it would be extremely difficult. Just because of the, like, and even as we were counting down, there were, you know, a couple half seconds of lag on each of our ends. And it's extremely difficult to like resonate with other bodies in a kind of digital space. Even though, you know, this is still to an extent very immediate and very miraculous, and I don't want to knock that. But it's I guess just interesting to note the kind of these tiny kind of like micro disruptions on the level of time.
I think Zoom performance is really interesting, and I took this, I'm in art education, and one of my classes this year is time-based media, and usually these are like really like, oh my god, make a video using free software. So they're really like punchy like things that are kind of super general, and it equals to something kind of awful. But my professor suggested that we do Zoom performances, but also didn't really talk about what performance meant. And like being a person who is a performance artist, I was really frustrated by my classmates who didn't really know what they were doing. But navigating this world as a place to make performance is really interesting. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh God. I was just whining to Prue that I like hate performing for Zoom. I am not heeding my own advice and in welcoming the interruption of Zoom into my performance practice very well. But I've kind of like, I've been invited to do like a bunch of like pre-recorded things, and I just like, I can perform for Zoom because there's like people on the other end. Like I can like read for Zoom, but I like I have a really hard time like reading for pre-recorded, like just like, you know, poetry reading for like camera. So I've been kind of exploring like video. So like recording like my voice reading, and then doing like other stuff with materials to incorporate like the visual side of things. So that is not on Zoom. So it's a long way of saying that I have not very well adapted my practice for my performance practice specifically like for Zoom, but maybe I won't have to. But I've been working on video stuff.
We tried out, like for this class project, we tried out this one thing where we were instructing each other to draw things by renaming ourselves. And
that's fun.
And that was really interesting, I guess, like in terms of poetry and performing on Zoom, the renaming feature is really exciting, but it also doesn't capture when you try to record it.
Oh, weird.
It's a note.
Weird. I'm gonna share my screen again because we're coming up along the edges of our workshop. I want to make sure that we can finish assembling mapping. Okay, so how do you want to use the body? Talked about that. We talked about rhythm 0 with the gun and the materials. I'm going to kind of combine our like materials list exercise with our mapping exercise. So this is just my awful handwriting and materials list from the performance I did at the poetry project a couple of years ago. So there's like material lists and also kind of like a tech list. Like what do I need from the tech realm that's different, a little bit different than the material realm. And there's always things that like you won't necessarily anticipate that you need. Like I had this like long roll of silver mylar and I didn't have scissors, and no one in the space had scissors, and we were like, how the fuck are we going to cut this? So then we had to go like buy scissors. So there's kind of like weird practical things, like maybe tool related, that you might want to think about, and I find it helpful to write down a list. So we're going to combine the materials list brainstorm with our mapping, So thinking about your source text and your, how you imagine your performance to be, kind of with respect to, thinking about interruptions, thinking about materials, thinking about potential rooms or anti-rooms it would be in, and, thinking about your inspiration, your inspo lineage. I want us to do an exercise where we do a map, like a schematic of our performance, and you can include materials as part of this. So maybe take 2 minutes at the beginning to write down materials, and then the next, 3 or 4 minutes to make a little map. And this is a schematic that I created for the Hold My Hand performance that was suggested viewing before, in advance of this workshop. So originally I thought I was going to like literally sew my hand together with thread or suture line, and through the exciting search for materials, kind of what I had imagined didn't really feel possible, and I kind of adapted it, and I used syringes. So it's a little hard to see, but I used syringes and pierced my fingers, and then kind of use this red wire to sew my hand together in a different way. And this kind of mutation of what I had originally imagined the performance to be occurred in the kind of the search for materials and like the testing of various materials, because the materials that I had originally imagined didn't really work the way that I had anticipated. And so I kind of had to like reframe what I was doing. And then I did this. So our exercise is going to be 2 minutes materials, and then maybe like 3 or 4 minutes schematic map. And so, okay, 2 minutes, go. Materials. Okay, now we're going to switch from materials to map/schematic for a couple minutes. No, I was muted. Hello, everyone. You may be wondering, now what? So I just want us to appreciate all of the ground we've covered. We've talked about our source texts. We've talked about spontaneity and interruption as being a material. We've talked about materials, and we've talked about performance maps and schematics. And now you're ready to assemble your performance. And I know we're coming up on 4 o'clock, so I want to leave some room for people to either leave if they have to, and maybe share a little bit about the last exercise, which was the materials list and the schematic, and or if you want to tell us about how your performance all came together. And there's also, oops, people are welcome to also stay a little bit longer and ask me questions. But you all have worked very hard and have been very generous in sharing with me and with your colleagues. And so I'm grateful for that. And I also just really want you to think about how far we've come today. We started here with the source text, and now we have ideas and maps and lists and visions for all of these things that assemble into performance. And I also want to say this is the kind of like construct and method that works for me in my practice. And, you know, some of these things might work for you. Some you might need to use some other things. You take or leave the aspects that feel right for you. So.
Also, what is really convenient and useful is having a conversation, you know. Like I'm trying really to initiate that with different people, just people that I know, people that I don't know yet that much, and kind of have like build a circle of exchange, because this is like I really like the way we kind of like went step by step, because I don't have time to overthink and just need to do it. And for me, it's really accessible. I'm really like knowing what I'm doing, because and it's like a kick also, you know, of what I didn't think prior. And did you ask, if I'm wrong, tell me, did you ask to share what we kind of ended up to have, or as in terms of materiality and all of that, or no?
Yeah, I would love to hear if people want to share about their materials, their schematic. I don't know if you drew something you can hold up to the camera, or if you like have a more concrete vision of what you want the performance to look like.
Okay, for me, it's like materiality. I came up with something is like just like a candle, just a candle, and a mini fan, or just a fan, something that gives a wind source, you know. Paper, scissors, and sheets. It doesn't have to be linen or silk. It's just sheets. And the electric plug, and it's really important because I didn't think about that, you know. So it has to be indoor. If it's outdoor or on a terrain vague, it's like, how can I just enter the space and kind of, so the frame here is different than what I was initially having, like recording myself, creating that poetry. So yeah, and the schematics and mapping is I thought about the question of trajectory. How do I arrive in the space, and how am I initiating the idea of the walk? Because the performance can be you know, I'm kind of like locating myself or positioning myself in front of a public, and you know, there's this type of stagnation where you just being there in central, but this is what I'm trying to kind of not avoid, but work with. So this question of balade, frivolité, something that is an ephemeral presence, and it's not me being a person, an individual being seen, but it's more like if you kind of understood or seen something really like dans le courant des choses, like. So yeah, that's it.
Amazing. There also are like, battery powered fans if you do want to do it outside. But if you were outside, you have to account for like natural wind, and you don't know, like the wind could be your spontaneous element and you could be battling the wind. There's a lot there to play with, but it's great that you were thinking about, the power source and stuff. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I don't know that I have fully developed ideas or a vision, but I do think like some of the questions you raised about like being attentive to and intentional about the like location of power during a performance feels very like generative and like important to think through. And also, yeah, like the kind of this idea of stakes in the text for the eye, stakes outside of it, vis-a-vis the body. So I guess I'm just thinking the poem I'm working on, I think is like ultimately like a pretty submissive piece, or like, I'm just wondering, and so I guess I'm finding myself thinking about how that might be embodied on stage, but yeah, that's about as far as I've gotten.
Thank you for sharing. That sounds like a great, foundation to build it out further. Like already thinking about those types of power relations that aren't happening, when you're like sitting in your house. So that's great. Anyone else like to share? Jules, Chloe.
I don't know if I have anything to share vis-a-vis my text in particular, because I think I was speaking before in the breakout rooms about just kind of like being very book oriented and very publication oriented, and kind of like the interruption there happening according to the reader's own kind of like capacity to put down the text and take up the text, and like the extents of attention in that. But I am loving this kind of conversation around power sources and power dynamics, and I have this kind of persistent kind of like occupation with like vitality, and how that sort of animates not only artworks but life in general, and kind of like how to negotiate sort of like on the one hand animating a work of art, and how to like negotiate kind of like the transfer of power, not only in the sense of kind of dynamics of control and oppression, but also dynamics of energy between, and also kind of dynamics of attraction and attention between, and kind of like thinking about how the configuration and the action of the body kind of feed into that. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Amazing. Thank you. Chloe, do you want to share? You also want to share your kitten situation?
Yes, so my kitten.
As the ultimate interruption of cuteness.
His name is Kisa. He has 6 toes on each paws. Kisa is Russian feminine word for kitty. He is a he. It's also feminine. The word itself is, my partner's Russian grandmother pointed out that the name is female, and we were like, we don't care. Anyway, this way, it's the cat side. I kind of was just writing notes when I was off screen there, in my kind of comfort space, about like deconstructing, I guess, performances and how to kind of bring other people into that world. I think is really interesting, because I think it comes really naturally to some people, and others it's something that you really need to think about step by step that might not necessarily occur otherwise, I guess. So I was just taking boring notes about that. But this has been a really interesting afternoon, and I really appreciate your time for sharing with us.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone feels like this has been a generative experience, and that you have lots of notes and maps and schematics and lists to foreground your future performances. Mm-hmm. And maybe they'll be on Zoom, maybe they'll be in person, maybe both.
Out of curiosity, Andrea, are you in Montreal, or are you in the States right now?
I'm in New York.
Okay.
I'm in the States. Yeah. Yeah, if people want to stick around and ask me a couple questions, I'm happy to respond. I also know it's been an exercise heavy workshop and you might be tired of being on camera. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me and for participating. And I'm excited to see what you all create.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I appreciate this time. Thank you, guys. Have a beautiful day.
Yeah. Thank you, Jules, too, on the far side of things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prudence, especially.
Yeah, of course.
Spearheading all this, and Andrea. Yeah.
Yeah, this was great.
I was telling Jules about this library sound listening podcast that I'm editing for my work right now. Essentially, there's this researcher at Concordia who is like listening to ambient noise as well as like audible recordings of poetry and other stuff in the library at Concordia. It's super interesting. So I'm going to send the link to that podcast episode when it's out to FAR/Jules. And hopefully we can share it with you.
Yeah, that
Super
sounds
cool.
really cool.
I'm not gonna lie, ambient library noise sounds like something that you would find on a 10-hour loop on YouTube.
Oh my God,
it really does, and it's so funny because this is like Concordia, and like the podcast is kind of spoken in a way that is okay for non-Concordians to listen to. So like one of the speakers at a time is like, oh yeah, this is an ambient staircase that we have leading up, and listening to our library described that way is so nice,
Okay, also the sound recordings that are always going on
yeah, they're super random. I don't know if there's sound like movement censored, but like we don't appreciate that enough.
It's really, Andrea, for context, when you walk up the orientation of a library is kind of weird. It's like you walk up stairs that go like that, and then
yeah, you're in a building that's not entirely the library, but and it's shared with other stuff, and then you
walk around, and like the library's on that side. But as you're walking up the stairs, there's always a kind of like, half the time it's like John Cage music, the other half the time it's like spoken word something.
Oh my God.
You're walking up the stairs, and you're only in the stairs for like 3 seconds. And you're like, what am I listening to? And then you completely forget as you went. But it's just interesting to put snippets of sound, like snippets of soundscapes into a soundscape.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very remediated. It's very cool.
So funny.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like for me, like I'm not a type of person that likes to work in that kind of like silence. So like ambient library noise is like not something that I want to listen to while I'm working. But I think it's nice to romanticize it. And especially in this time, but yeah,
Yeah, quiet places have all kinds of sounds. Wrappers, creaky stuff.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the library, I've got like 3 pairs of earplugs in, but Mhm.
Is the library open?
Yes.
Yeah, with an asterisk.
Mm.
Well, it's kind of or something.
It-
I've like taken it.
It's complicated.
Yeah. I just got back into our library 2 days ago and found out that the plants had all not died. Guys, plants like this little weird vine that you can't see because my background is. You see that? Yeah, plants like that. Apparently, you can leave them for a year and they won't die.
Wow.
But the FFA also has like the fire has like so many windows. So
Yeah, but who was watering them? Not I. Not
true.
So I'm impressed and I'm heartened and I shed a little tear.
So no.
Oh, that's good. Some stuff is open for you all.
Yeah, totally. So before we wrap up, I guess Andrea and Chloe, if you two want to split, you know, I don't want to like detain you here, but I'm wondering, Jules, do you know how to like archive the recording or like where that even goes?
As soon as you end the meeting, are we still recording?